You can see why I want to get in a minute up here, because that program really does make a difference. I want to read, as we wind this up, I'm going to read about 3 paragraphs from my friend Lynn Reynolds' new book, which I talked about earlier, and argued David. And it's chapter 6. It's titled From Media to Media, W-E-D-I-A. And I think the reason I decided to do it was listening to that discussion in the last panel, led by David Hunt. It's not simply MilBloggers, but individuals able to report what they know and what they see. And the reason I want to read this is because the man that Glenn is quoting here, Zayad, of Zayad of Healing Iraq, blogspot.com, is an Iraqi who scooped the New York Times. Go ahead and read this. You'll see that it's individuals with discrete knowledge and the expertise and then the availability of the technology to report it. Here's what Glenn wrote. Zayad was a 28-year-old dental student in Baghdad. He had never worked as a journalist, but American journalist blogger Jeff Jarvis found his weblog, Healing Iraq, and liked it. Jarvis, the president of Condé Nast's Internet division, and a huge fan of Iraqi and Iranian bloggers, had Federal expressed him a digital camera the week before, paying more in shipping than the camera cost. Zayad was still learning how to use it when he covered a mammoth anti-terrorist, anti-Ba'ath demonstration in Baghdad, posting pictures on his blog. Over 20,000 people marched. Western media ignored the story, but in spite of this neglect, Zayad's pictures and reporting attracted the notice of Americans. Hundreds of thousands saw his reports on the internet, and the next week, the Weekly Standard reprinted them, photos and all. It was a swift move from an obscure website to covered print real estate in less than a week. Even more striking, the left-leaning webzine Salon was inspired to run a story on how Zayad had scooped the New York Times, which had published a contextless photo from the march, but otherwise ignored it. Before the internet and blogs, the Times' mission would have kept us ignorant. But this time, it left the Times embarrassed and readers aware that stories were going unreported. The Zayad story points up a typical pattern in the relationship between big media and blogs. Before Zayad embarrassed the Times, bloggers had noticed remarks made by then Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott at Strom Thurmond's 100th birthday party. Remarks suggesting that Lott would have preferred to see the segregationist Dixiecrat Party, on whose ticket Thurmond had run, win the presidency in 1948. Although these comments were made at a gala event with numerous reporters in attendance, they weren't reported in the news until several days later, after bloggers on both the left and right had made a stink. By the time it was over, Lott was an ex-majority leader. So there you've got an example. It's funny saying it's simply the military community or foreign affairs reporter. There you've got the Trent Lott issue as well. It's people aware and people who are able. And this is the way I put it myself. I made a few notes just a few minutes ago. What am I going to say? How am I going to wind this up? Well, I'm really not going to attempt to wind it up. I'm going to point out a couple of things that I think that the panels brought up several times on all 3 panels, and then refer to, I think, an important paragraph in my opening remarks. You no longer, small doesn't matter in the same way to the technology. Direct experience, honest reaction, credible analysis, establishing context, and telling the truth. Those are what matter. We are watching, and in some cases, people in this room are participating in a process. What has been a cottage industry and a personal communication tool is in some cases becoming something else. Not alternative, and I heard the word alternative used in the last panel, alternative meeting. Not alternative, but additional news and analysis. I'm going to stress that again. Additional. Because there are smart folks out there, just like Jeff said, that are making the connection. And I will tell you, I'm a member of the National Conference of Editorial Writers. I am, in some ways, mainstream media or big media. My column runs in a couple of dozen major papers around the country. My Creative Syndicate column. And I have seen in the National Conference of Editorial Writers, a group that I belong to, and I really love the conventions, in the last 18 months, a change in awareness about blogs. In part, there have been two editorial page editors, Dr. Simmons at the Omaha World Herald, and Kevin and Willie. This Kevin and Willie, the Dallas Morning News, who are very aware of blogs. The Dallas Morning News has its own blog, and they're aware of the excitement and change going on here. On the blogs, you see diversified skills, discrete knowledge, and discrete expertise, with the technological ability now to demonstrate those capabilities. Now, earlier I was asked about copies of my speech. I had 3 different people ask me about the speech I gave this morning. Part of that speech is going to appear in a new criterion in June. Eventually, I'm going to put it up on my website. I will be writing, and I'm not going to put it up for about probably 3 or 4 weeks. So it'll be a time lag on that because I owe that to new criteria. I will be writing about the conference and the issues it raised in my Creator Syndicate column at pajamasmedia.com, at strategypage.com, and on my website, austinbay.net. And I guarantee you next week there's a podcast that pajamasmedia.com is now putting out called Blog Week in Review. The conference is going to be discussed. Many of the issues raised in the conference. But I do want to go ahead and reread what I think is a useful paragraph. And this is from my speech this morning. A lot of what you heard discussed really is problems with imagery and with television. So what's missing from most of the television reports? It may not be missing from upcoming documentaries, and certainly I'm very interested in seeing what the War Tapes does. Tribeca is a good first venue for that, because that means that her film is going to be seen. It's going to be seen by a very savvy film audience and film critics, and I'm glad to hear that. So when I talk about television, televised imagery, I'm not necessarily talking about documentary. This is what I think is missing, and this is what I said this morning. At the individual level, duty and discipline are usually missing in action when it comes to television. Yet they are fundamental to a soldier's experience in peace and war, but they are slow again. Sustained efforts that rarely reduce to sensational imagery. Just think about some of the discussions that we've heard today. You can capture this in a documentary. It's not an inherent problem of video imagery. Courage tends to receive lip service. But courage in war is as difficult a trait for an observer to measure. It is a trait best understood by participants. Understanding friction is also rare. Television portrays it as either excitement or failure, or doesn't cover it all at all, because friction isn't an instantaneous phenomenon, but a process and accumulation. That means wearing yourself down by the day-to-day effort it takes to do what a soldier, sailor, Marine, airman is expected to do and has to do in a combat zone. I'm going to give the book again. It's the classic. Everything is very simple in war. General Karl von Clausewitz wrote, but the simplest thing is difficult. These difficulties accumulate and produce a friction which no man can imagine exactly who has not seen war. You see, that's the thing. The great correspondence that we've been praising of your early pilots saw it, and he had the literary capabilities, the psychological gift of rendering what it was like to go through the experience, the exertion, the suffering, the success, and the failure. Now, move on from there to say, let's give Andy one other big thanks, Andy and her volunteers. Get to the pub crawl, as I explained here. Just remember, this her energy and her vision to do it, folks, okay? I understand that Black 5 and a few others have organized a conference hub crawl. Let me say that again for all the Marines, just to make sure that you heard it. I know this is a delight of being a Marine. Conference hub crawl. The invites are available on a table in the hallway. That's what I told you. And the information.
Rephrase it, hub crawl.
Oh, I got that wrong. EUB, that means bar, okay? Joint, juke joint, okay? Beer joint. Except that on the list, you'll see it's a really interesting collection of Washington, D.C. watering holes. It really is. All right. I've certainly enjoyed participating. I understand we're going to show that video that the conference began with this morning, so I'm going to sing it off here, and I'm going to say, we hope to see you next year. Goodbye.